Leonie talked about a lot of the tikanga, and we've had some examples of racism that from Whai Cheryl. So here we go, we'll pass it over to Naropi.
Anyone else got a question? Just to get something started. So, just in relation to, can you hear me? It's an organisation, which I'm talking about, just get your thoughts around that a lot of people in here come from, organisations like our own, where probably 70% of the funding comes via the system. And what's attached to that is, of course, is an audit process. And I'm not talking about a financial audit, that's separate. I'm talking about audit of the organisation and the personnel in it, and all the, the processes and policies and things like that. Now, we just want to talk about experience we had recently in relation to that audit, where it's been farmed out basically to an auditing agency. We've got about 70, 80 auditors that do this throughout the country. And nobody wanted to come and audit us, which was fine by us, but it's, it wasn't real. They sent somebody. And they only had, and the Māori auditors that are employed by that organisation were, unwell and couldn't come. So they sent a rather well-meaning, a young Pākehā woman. And she's she's personable and that, and she wanted to know, and she was eager. But the opening question she asked us was, how do you take care of the wairua of people that come into your organisation for support? Now, this is a Pākehā woman who knows nothing about anything to do with us, asking us to explain to her in our policies and procedures and how we practice, how we actually take care of the wairua of people. Māori people, let alone Pākehā, we've got a wide spectrum of cultures that come to us. Primarily Māori, but that's an example of the audit question. What we did was we took up, she's only there for 8 hours. At least half an hour answering that question in different ways, just to teach her a lesson. And then there was another one, and so we took another half hour to answer that question about how we do something in a Māori way, about dress the mana and the tapa. Another half hour, and she got the message then. But, I just want to, probably know what you're going to say. It's the absolute cheek and imposition of asking that sort of question to a kaupapa Māori organisation. I thought next time, if they come in the next couple of years to do, there's going to be a wānanga. You're here for a week. It's a week wānanga, and we're going to talk about wairua, because that's what it should be. But this idea of auditing and then the big push from government at the moment to try and get a handle on what the hell those Maoris are doing and how they're doing it. They call it kaupapa Māori, and trying to get a handle on that so that they can actually begin to regulate. Is there a question in there? I'm sure we're not the only ones that have experienced that. Please find a question on it.
No, I didn't hear a question, but I will comment on that because when we sort of face agencies that suddenly their name goes from DHB to Te Whatu Ora, when it goes from SIFs to Oranga Tamariki, we always wind up in this dilemma of, and it's really hard. It's really difficult, especially if you have an understanding of the depth of the term they've just appropriated. So we find that we wind up in providing then often Pākehā inside those organisations. We use our own emotional labour then. It's an added burden because we're having to use our emotional labour to then try to mediate that sort of dilemma. And yeah, it's just my.
I've got one. I've got mine.
We've got another question.
I'll just finish on this one with Cheryl just for a moment, because I agree. I think that I think emotional labour is a good term. The way that we're drained of our emotional and cultural labour and knowledge, and that symbolic violence. When people talked about all different forms of violence, and symbolic violence is exactly that kind of appropriation of it, turning it back on us, and using a whole range of symbols and processes to do that. And we get caught in this double bind often, where in order to do the mahi in this current context of being treated as a subordinate partner and a subcontractor, there are certain things that we have to then respond to in their auditing. And when we think about things like kura, and Graham might talk a little bit about this tomorrow maybe, you know, kohanga and kura being initiated out of our own whānau, out of our own garages, out of our own contexts, and doing that. And I think one of the things that, you know, and seeking this acknowledgement of that, but then very quickly the Crown comes over with ERO and piles it all on top. And so anything that they see as vaguely taking off as a resistance movement, they attempt to then co-opt back into that space by redefining it. And I think the naming that Cheryl was talking about is really important. We've gone through all of this seeking to revitalise Te Reo Māori and take control of Te Reo Māori to see a whole range of co-options happening, and no one living up to what those concepts actually mean for us. And so some of us won't use certain names for the Ministry for Children because they remain undeserving of the name. And they've always been undeserving of the name. I'm not talking about individual workers. I'm talking about structures. I'm talking about the Crown. I'm talking about the system remains undeserving of that name. And so we should stop using it with any of the organisations that utilise Te Reo Māori, but are actually violent toward our people. And I think that's another good example, in the well-meaning young Pākehā woman who gets thrown into the fire of Tūtama Wahine or Aroha, to any of anyone, to our organisations too, that have to deal with that emotional labour, deal with that constant justification and rationalisation of who we are. And I'll pick up on Cindy's point this morning around not just the decommissioning of, we have other words for what needs to happen to those institutions, but until they're fully dismantled and reconstructed in line with a meaningful Te Reti o Waitangi relationship, they're going to continue to do that.
Oh, kia ora kōrua. Thank you for your comments today. My question is actually for you, Cheryl. The report on the iwi report on Lake Alice, what has been the Crown's response to that? And are there learnings that you could share with us, I mean, apart from reading the report, just quickly share with us in terms of other mana whenua who might have such spaces, such structures on their whenua that you could perhaps just share today?
So what's happened with the report is it was submitted to the Royal Commission on state abuse, and that's where it's gone to so far. We haven't done anything else with it at this stage. But yeah, so I think, but we certainly want to put it out wider. We're very keen to do that. So we're just waiting for the outcome of the Royal Commission in terms of its processes, what it's doing. It's got a report. It's drafting up a report on the Lake Alice inquiry just as a separate report right now. So once that comes out, we'll probably put ours out separately. I think it was a good process for us to go through as Niwi, I think we hadn't even really thought about the numbers of institutions we had in our iwi until we actually started that report. And could kind of see that overview of, it helped us better context what was happening in our mental health services, helped us really see a lot clearer, I think, the rollout, the impacts.
I think too, if we're looking at historical abuse, then probably all of our hapua niwi need to be looking at what institutions are on our whenua, because there are many of them around the motu, and we just have to look at residential schools in Turtle Island to know that a whole range of things happened in those schools. And so what I really liked about your kōrero, Cheryl, was the layers of whenua, of taiao, of tangata, and that interrelationship of all of these things. And, we need to know what's happened, our wairua too, what's happened on our whenua, so that when we walk that whenua, we know what's actually in the whenua. And we know that we need to clear the whenua. Because we know karakia is not just about clearing ourselves, it's a clearing of everything. And so there are a whole range of sites, I think, spread, and you'd know, around the motu, where these institutions have happened, certain things have happened. One example, actually, and I don't know if Jen's here, but we did a workshop in one of the buildings at Unitec a number of years ago, and it was cold all the time. And we know things have happened in those buildings. And I remember everyone in the room thinking, it didn't matter how much you turned the heating up in that room, it never felt warm. It was the first time I'd been in that room. And I think Kim might have been there, a few others were there, and we noticed it. And so I think that is happening all over the motu, and there are a whole range of other institutions. But definitely when we look at what's happening in Turtle Island, and particularly in Canada, knowing what actually happened in that whenua is really important, and healing that whenua, right?
Kia ora tātou, one more question.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Tēnā kōrua i ngā ringa a hine te iwa. Kua tui anei i ngā whakaaro o tātou tūpuna. Taino kia tātou o rātou uri. Kia tūmata kāhuki ngā whakaaro, ngā ara kimua, hei tukutuku roimata. Nā reira kamihi kia kōrua. Ko tāku pātai, ki te taha o te reo. So I noticed that we had some of kupu that came through in the research, and one of the pātai that I have at the moment is how do we connect what is the reality within this mahi with those who are our real speakers that sit outside of this mahi. And one of the examples of that come across recently is the term tai tōkai, which has been translated to mean sexual abuse. But if we look at the term as tai and the way that it's been created, tai being anger and tōkai being copulation, then that really doesn't take in all the nuances of sexual abuse in its totality. And I understand that it's a process, but I'm just wondering where we are heading in terms of connecting into these other spaces and journeying together. Kia ora.
A few years ago, we did some mahi with Tūtama Wahine around looking at family violence in Taranaki and some of the origins. And when we talk to whānau in Taranaki, one of the things that was very clear is that actually the rongoa in te reo and the rongoa in tikanga has to be a part of the wider healing, which we know. And so one of the things that we've been looking at is how do we bring mātanga reo into the context of healing and us seeing that. So we're stuck in these silos, and it's detrimental for us. It's detrimental for us to be stuck in these silos that have been imposed on us and to be called the family violence sector or the sexual violence sector, as if they're somehow separated from kohanga reo and from kura kaupapa Māori. So I think one of the critical things is that actually we need to stop doing that. And we need to start beginning to join all of our kaupapa together. So those doing te reo Māori, kaiako, mātanga, actually know that they have a role to play in healing whānau violence. And that we have a role to play in re-accessing te reo and tikanga for those whānau that are ready for it in our context. So bringing them together and actually looking at mātauranga in its fullness. In terms of when we talk about mātauranga, we can't continue to talk about it separated into disciplines the way that they've disciplined it. It just doesn't work for our people in that way. So mātauranga requires all of the parts of the knowledge to come together. And we don't all hold all those parts of the knowledge. And it may have been deliberate that our tupuna have kept it with certain people so that they come together and bring the whole picture together. And I think that we need to start thinking about that as well, which is why it's always been, we would never do this research as researchers without practitioners, because it's not ours to do. We have a role, the kaimahi have a role, the organisations have a role, and it's in the bringing it all together that we get a fuller picture. I agree, I'm a little bit concerned about that translation, and I think it's important to go back to whoever's doing the translation and ensuring that they conceptually understand the mahi. Because in translation, if you don't conceptually understand the mahi, you're going to put the wrong kupu in.
Kia ora.
Yeah.